Tonight, the Olympic symbol has always been 5 intersecting rings. Might a more appropriate one be 5 fattening donuts? As the greatest athletes at the peak of human fitness prepare to gather in London, an angry cardiologist questions why some key sponsors are linked to a crisis of obesity and unhealthy eating.
I find it obscene that the Olympics chooses to associate itself with fast food, sugary drinks, chocolate and alcohol.
He's here to debate with a marketing man and an Olympian. Good evening. The Olympic motto is Citius, Altius, Fortius, faster, higher, stronger. So why are some of the key sponsors of the greatest sporting event in the world organisations like Coca-Cola, Cadbury's, McDonald's and Heineken, regarded by nutrition experts as more likely to be associated with the motto fatter, slower and unhealthier? Many in the medical profession fear Britain is now in an obesity crisis, the costs of which could bankrupt the NHS and is linked with sugary processed foods of precisely the type whose logos will be associated with the Olympic Games. For one doctor's personal assessment of the dangers, we turn to a cardiologist, Dr. Asim Malhotra.
Over the last 30 years, processed food has taken over the British diet. And over the past 30 years, obesity has more than doubled. Now, as London prepares to host a global sporting celebration, processed food has taken over the Olympics.
It's a scandal that the food and drink industry are high-profile sponsors of the Olympic Games. The Olympics are supposed to be about fitness and health, and to associate them with products which are damaging our health, particularly our children's health, is quite wrong.
The human heart is a thing of simplicity and wonder. It is designed to pump blood around your body at 60 beats per minute for close on 80 years. Unless you live on a diet of processed food. I work at the Heart Attack Centre in London's Royal Free Hospital, where we've witnessed an explosion of diet-related diseases.
Come across to our rail for me, please.
By 2050, 90% of Britain's population will be overweight.
2.5 of Rapamil given.
And treating obesity will cost the NHS £45 billion a year. The United Kingdom is on the verge of a major public health disaster, the cost of which could dwarf that of alcohol and tobacco, and even cripple the NHS. What's the most important factor? Sugar and carbohydrates added to processed food. I believe what we eat is killing us. This is not the same old warning about junk food. I'm much more concerned about all processed food. Processed foods contain few of the natural nutrients we need to survive, yet are loaded with added sugars and carbohydrates that the body does not need. So the body converts them to fat.
If you look at when the obesity epidemic really took off in the UK, which was in the late 1970s, early 1980s, our consumption of processed food has increased in parallel. And it's now predominantly what we're eating, not the exception or the add-on to the real food. It is our entire diet.
Zoe Harcombe has studied the rise of sugars in our diet. She says we have it all wrong. The body knows how to process the fats and proteins in foods like butter, meat and eggs, but it has no idea what to do with all the added sugars that appear in processed food.
Sugar is the only substance that humans ingest that has no nutritional value whatsoever. No essential fats, no protein, no vitamins, no minerals. It really is quite unique in that respect. So in terms of sugar, we either eat it on top of what we should be eating, in which case it can make us fat, or we eat it instead of what we should be eating, in which case it leaves us nutritionally deficient and we end up sick. So we're getting fat and sick at the same time.
Whilst big food companies continue to make huge profits, in Britain, the bill is borne by the NHS and the taxpayer. In the shadow of the Olympic Stadium, doctors are facing an epidemic of diabetes.
Within the borough of Newham, we've probably seen a doubling of the number of patients diagnosed with type 2 diabetes over the last 10 years. I would say that about 40 to 50% of our consultations in the practice are related to diabetes or its complications. And we want you to see if you can feel this.
I've come to a GP surgery just 2 miles from the Olympic Park. Dr. Chandra Gowda says the majority of his resources already go towards fighting diet-related illness.
We are looking to see whether the nerves...
Diabetes is a multi-organ, multi-system disease that can lead to heart attacks, strokes and amputation.
Very good.
Treating it early is vital.
We're seeing patients present with other conditions like high blood pressure related to the diabetes, high levels of cholesterol, some long-term complications of diabetes which can affect the eyes, the kidneys with chronic kidney disease.
Every day the NHS has to battle the effects of sugary foods and the marketing campaigns that push them. Surely the Olympics should be an occasion for countering these messages, not reinforcing them. We are facing an obesity epidemic, and I find it obscene that the Olympics chooses to associate itself with fast food, sugary drinks, chocolate and alcohol.
Of course the sponsors cannot be held accountable for Britain's poor health, but their connection with the Games sends a dreadful message. And I'm not the only one to think so.
I think it's quite shocking that companies like McDonald's, Coke, Cadbury's and Heineken are the main food sponsors. These are products which are all very well as a treat, but what the Olympic sponsorship allows them to do is promote their brand and insinuate their way into people's daily diet. Whether you're looking at obesity, whether you're looking at people's dental problems, whether you're even looking at the rising youth alcohol issue, these companies are the culprits and they shouldn't be such prominent sponsors of the Olympics.
Diane Abbott is not only Shadow Public Health Minister, she's also an East End MP. In the 19th century, the poor faced illnesses like cholera and typhoid. Today, with inner city areas effectively fresh food deserts and childhood obesity levels rocketing, the health of Britain's poor is still determined by class.
Obesity is now a disease of poverty. And when you look at the statistics, as I've done, what you find is obesity is a bigger problem for people on lower incomes. For instance, just recently we found out that the largest number and the rising number of gastric band operations for people who are heavily obese are amongst the people with the very lowest income. I mean, once upon a time, poor people couldn't get enough to eat. Nowadays, poor people's health is threatened by obesity.
In Newham, the largest McDonald's in the world has been built in the Olympic Park. It is 30,000 square feet in size and will seat over 1,500 people. That the London Olympics allows this kind of food such prominence is, in my opinion, disastrous for public health.
I avoided excess sugars and sugary products. I try to keep to fairly normal, kind of mother would tell you, fresh vegetables, that type of thing.
Athletes certainly don't base their diet on processed food. One of Britain's Olympic greats tells me that even 30 years ago, he was avoiding it.
At the Olympic Games, people would often take a lot of sugary products, everything's free, and you saw athletes pump on the weight during a Games. So obviously I'd noticed that and I avoided it.
But weaning itself off fast food and sugary drinks appears to be a problem for the International Olympic Committee too.
We know the negative health impact, obesity, etc., of processed foods and sugars. And I suppose the IOC now have a really challenging situation. Yes, they need the money from the sponsors, and that money has come in and really helped. But more than that, they've benefited for many years of the reach these sponsors have into new marketplaces, to children, etc. And it's really helped. Now their challenge is, how do they deal with the health impact of that?
Bit of pushing now, sir, in the arm, okay?
But there seems little sign that the Olympic movement will move away from its current sponsors. Indeed, when challenged, the London organisers talk of the financial black hole their absence would create.
So we can get the screen's a bit...
But obesity will soon open up a much, much bigger black hole in the NHS's budget. It may not be a priority for the London Olympics, but the costs of obesity are foremost in the mind of all of us who work to improve public health.
Well, obviously, we asked to speak to someone from LOCOG, the London Organising Committee, and the IOC, as well as the sponsors mentioned in that report, but no one was made available. But there's, of course, plenty of statements from all of them on our website, broadly saying that all is well and that the Olympics would not happen without their support. We can speak, though, to Asim Malhotra, the cardiologist you saw in that report, Michael Payne, former Director of Marketing for the International Olympic Committee, and James Cracknell, the rower, who twice won Olympic gold for Britain. Surely there must be better people to sponsor the Olympics than some of these organisations.
The problem of obesity today is a major issue, but it's as much to do with what people are eating as a broader lifestyle agenda in terms of people getting active.
But and I think associating the epitome of health on our planet with foods that make people obese if eaten to excess is a real problem, isn't it? There's a big mixed message there.
McDonald's, from when they began becoming a sponsor for the Olympics, we started to challenge them to say, right, how do you broaden the agenda? So they introduced salads, and the original testing of salads and the broadening of their menu was started at the Olympics. Similarly with Coca-Cola, in terms of spreading into sports drinks, nutritional drinks, that's all been driven over the last 20 years. It's not just a case of the revenue and funding these companies bring, not just to the games, but to the teams in sport, but the programs in terms of a Go Active and health programs that they run around 200 countries.
But you wouldn't accept cigarette money, would you?
No, the IOC was the first to drop cigarettes
or weapons manufacturers
and
or
hard alcohol.
But well, you accept beer money, but you don't accept whiskey money.
You don't accept spirits, but you can go after every industry. Before you know, you'll start saying, right, let's not have cars because they impact the environment. Let's not do airlines. Let's not have sports clothing because that's made in India.
Do you think athletes care about this? Because as Jack Rogger, the IOC president, said in the FT today that there is a question mark over whether to continue with McDonald's.
As an athlete, there's people in society, and that counts athletes, will always fall down the gaps. I don't think people watch the Olympics will assume because there's a fast food chain and a drinks chain sponsoring them that those are what the products the athletes live on. You know, you say.
I mean, would you, when you're training? I mean, you may have the odd Coca-Cola or McDonald's, but when you're training, you wouldn't have much of that in your diet, would you?
No, the athletes need to have self-discipline, but also, in the 20 years I was an athlete, I consumed a lifetimes of food. I had 6,000 calories a day as opposed to the normal 2,000. So I had 60 years worth of food in.
But not processed food so much.
Not processed food, but you also have to live, and you know, everything in moderation is good. But I think the most important thing an athlete can do is that when they stop competing, is that they don't change shape, they don't balloon in weight.
So they don't eat this stuff.
Well, so they look after it. They can eat it. They keep moving. As long as you burn off more calories than you put in, and you do eat the sensible things. But you don't want to show you were just healthy and fit, because that's what you needed to do in order to win. You need to have that as a guiding principle in life to make the most of it.
Right, let's bring in Dr. Malhotra. You know, would you accept that if you don't get companies to sponsor the Olympics, there might not be an Olympics, and it helps people, encourages people to take part in sport, which is part of a healthy lifestyle? It's good, in other words.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say that I don't believe that we need to rely purely on food companies that promote unhealthy foods for the Olympics. And secondly, I want to pick up this point about physical activity because it's quite an interesting one. From my perspective, I think it's something that's used quite well by the food industry, almost to deflect from their own culpability and irresponsible marketing to children. If you actually look at the data and evidence, over the last 30 years, our physical activity levels have probably actually increased slightly. Now, that may sound odd, but all the data, when we've looked at this, suggests that our overconsumption of cheap, sugary and junk foods is the main factor contributing to obesity. And to put this in context for your viewers, for example, if I was to have a bar of chocolate, a packet of crisps, and a burger and chips washed down with a fizzy drink, I would have to run for about 5 hours to burn off those calories.
Right.
So to actually talk about physical activity, I think it's just
Let me bring in Michael Payne on that point. I mean, clearly there is a benefit to these companies in associating themselves with the healthy living of athletes. That's why they do it. But it's phony, isn't it? And in a way, the Olympics is saying this is okay. You're endorsing it.
It's not phony at all, because I think the whole issue is whether you're taking these products in some moderation. The programs that these sponsors are running, without it, in terms of not just from the funding of the games, but the programs around the world in getting kids active, the governments are cutting back. They're not putting the funding in.
But you just heard Dr. Malhotra saying there that the question of exercise, you'd have to exercise for 5 hours, run for 5 hours to burn off those kind of calories. So
would we be better off in saying, let's not have the Olympics? Because I came from a period...
And that's not what we're saying. Would we be better off if the Olympics were sponsored by somebody other than these people?
Where are the fewer companies stepping forward to come and fund the games? They're not there.
They just don't exist.
They don't exist.
So the Olympics
with each industry, whether it's environmental or each one of them, every time the Olympics come along, you get a call saying, no, we can't have that company, we can't have that company. So if the IOC took that position and walked away from all the companies, game over. No Olympics, no support for sport.
And yet,
sorry, if I may, just the challenge is to make sure that these companies understand their responsibility and the way that the IOC has...
Well, Dr. Malhotra, are you quite literally here a spoil sport? Because if you had your way, there might actually be no Olympics.
Well, I don't agree with that. I mean, let's look at the statistics. You know, in 2004, the World Health Organization announced that obesity was a global epidemic. Yet, 8 years later, we've got the Olympics on our own turf. And the statistics tell us that we have now 1 in 3 children by the age of 9 are either overweight or obese. So these so-called interventions about physical activity, as far as I'm concerned, the most effective intervention needs to be a public health strategy that targets the population as a whole. And you've got to remember, the Olympic Games is the most effective international marketing platform in the world. This will go out to over 200 countries, reaching billions of people, and we have the main sponsors associated with unhealthy foods.
Okay,
and in particular, I'm most concerned about the children that... Yeah.
Right. Okay, but James Cracknell, I mean, those comments from Jack Rogger do suggest that there may be some reconsidering here, but most people in Britain have not heard of him. They've heard of you and they've heard of other athletes. Do you not think that you've got a responsibility, not just not to get fat in your old age because you're not training so much, but actually to set some kind of example while you are training, because you are a role model?
There is a responsibility, and it's also a responsibility that we have as a society, because obesity is a hugely complex issue. To just say it's one sport event every 4 years and the companies that sponsor it that creates the obesity problem. If you had, say, the 1 in 3 children under the age of 9 are obese, they will have had 1, possibly maximum of 2 Olympic Games in that period. And it is a complex issue, and it is something that in society we need to make sure that there aren't people falling through the gaps, the same way we support them in every other way. But it is absolutely crucial to change the way that we lead sedentary lives. You know, that there are the other sponsors.
Which the Olympics plays a part in that by encouraging you to get involved.
And also there are other sponsors rather than necessarily just the food and drink products. That there are, whether it's the technology, whether it's you have a television company. There's so many of the other sponsors, but they're the ones with the money to fund it.
We'll leave it there.